Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really high-stakes trade war that suddenly blew up between two major strategic partners, the United States and India. It's a massive clash of geopolitics, economics, and, you guessed it, competing national interests.
And it all kicked off with this one number, 50%. In August of 2025, the U.S. slapped India with a massive 50% cumulative tariff on a whole range of its goods. Now, this wasn't against a rival. We're talking about a country the U.S. considers a key partner. So the question is, why?
Well, India's response was immediate, and it was sharp. They didn't just call the move unjust or unreasonable. No, they went straight for economic blackmail. I mean, language like that between partners, that signals this is way more than a simple disagreement. It's setting the stage for a major confrontation. So this gets us right to the heart of it. Why would the United States risk such a vital partnership? Why pull out one of its biggest economic weapons against a friend? Well, the answer really depends on who you ask, because this story has two completely different versions of reality. All right, so to really get to the why behind this massive tariff, we've got to look at these two very different stories coming out of Washington and New Delhi. So on the one hand, you have the U.S. rationale. They frame this in two ways. First, it was about punishing nations seen as propping up Russia's economy and, by extension, its war machine. And second, it was part of that broader America First trade policy. But India pushed back, and they pushed back hard. They argued, look, this is about economic necessity for us. It's not some political statement. They defended their right to strategic independence and pointed to what they saw as obvious double standards from the West.
And this chart, this is the trigger. This explains everything. Before 2022, Russian oil was barely a blip on India's radar, less than 0.5% of its total supply. But fast forward to 2025 and look at that. It's skyrocketed to over 35% of all their imports. This huge sudden shift, driven by India buying up discounted Russian oil after Western sanctions kicked in, is exactly what drew Washington's fire.
And this is where India's accusation of a double standard really comes into play. New Delhi started pointing fingers, saying, wait a minute, while you're targeting us, your allies in Europe are buying record amounts of Russian natural gas. And the U.S. itself is still importing Russian uranium. So from India's perspective, it looked like they were being singled out and punished for doing something other U.S. partners were also doing.
And the escalation was incredibly fast. This wasn't a slow burn. It started in April with a 10% global tariff. Okay, then, boom, August 1st, a 25% tariff hits India specifically. And just 26 days later, before they could even really react, another 25% gets stacked right on top because of the Russian oil issue. That's how we got to that staggering 50% total.
You know, a 50% tariff isn't just a political statement, it is an economic earthquake. So let's actually look at the projected damage, because this was going to hurt both the Indian and the U.S. economies. For India, the projections were, well, pretty grim. We're talking about a potential drop in GDP growth of over a full percentage point. Their national fuel bill could spike by up to $12 billion a year. Exports to the U.S., a massive market for them, could collapse, and you see there, crucial, job-heavy sectors like textiles and jewelry, they are right in the line of fire. And it's not just one opinion. The big players in the financial world all agreed. Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bloomberg, they all forecasted a significant blow to India's economic growth. While the exact numbers might vary a little bit, the message was unanimous. The pain was going to be substantial, and it was going to be immediate. You know, beyond the big abstract numbers, there's a real human cost here. For industries like textiles, which employ millions of people in India, a 50% tariff isn't just another challenge. It's what many called an existential threat. For countless smaller businesses, it could mean having to shut down their U.S. operations entirely, leading to just widespread job losses. But this is not a one-way street. This kind of thing has a boomerang effect that comes right back to the United States. The stated goal was to protect U.S. jobs and industry, right? But the economic reality is that tariffs on Indian goods, many of which are parts for American companies or just everyday items on store shelves, means higher prices for American consumers, major disruptions for supply chains, and the real potential for sparking inflation all over again. The economic impact is clearly serious, but the geopolitical fallout could be even more profound. This trade war is creating deep, deep cracks in a partnership that has been so carefully built over decades. So let's look at exactly what's at stake here. You see, the U.S.-India relationship rests on these key strategic pillars. There's the Quad Alliance, that crucial security dialogue with Japan and Australia. There's India's official status as a major defense partner for the U.S. And there are newer economic groups like the I2U2 with Israel and the UAE.
The whole point of this entire architecture is to act as a counterweight to China's influence. This trade war puts all of that under serious strain. As one analyst put it, this single dispute threatens to undo a quarter-century of hard work in building this partnership. This goes so far beyond trade figures. We're talking about eroding the very foundation of trust between the world's two largest democracies. And this brings us to a massive contradiction in U.S. policy, something we can call the friend-shoring paradox. So on one hand, the U.S. wants American companies to move their supply chains to friendly nations like India and get them away from China. But on the other hand, it's economically punishing the very partner it needs to make that whole strategy work. It's a policy that's literally fighting itself. And this forces us to ask a really difficult question. Is the U.S. accidentally pushing India, a country that fiercely protects its independence, away from the West and maybe even closer to rivals like Russia and China?
This brings both nations and, you could argue, the entire global trade system to a critical crossroads. So where does this all go from here? Well, it seems like there are three potential paths forward.
Broadly speaking, we're looking at three possible outcomes. First, negotiation and de-escalation, where the diplomats win the day and they hammer out a compromise. Second, a long, drawn-out trade conflict, where these tariffs just become the new normal, causing long-term economic damage. And the third, and most serious outcome, is a major geopolitical realignment, where India decides it needs to fundamentally shift its foreign policy. Ultimately, the entire situation boils down to this one core dilemma, especially for the United States. Is the short-term leverage you gain from tariffs worth the long-term strategic cost of alienating a partner as absolutely vital as India?
And this leaves us all with a fundamental question. In a world with so many complex threats, what is the true price of an alliance? And maybe more importantly, what happens when a country decides that price is simply too high to pay? Thank you for joining us on The Explainer.